The Galactic Council chamber was a spectacle of grandeur. Massive, floating holographic screens illuminated the room, casting an eerie, artificial glow on the diverse assembly of species gathered there. Alien dignitaries from every corner of the galaxy were seated, watching with the detached air of beings accustomed to centuries of power. Among them was Captain Aidan Graves, standing quietly at the back of the hall. His uniform was impeccable, a reflection of his sharp mind and calculated demeanor, but today, his presence was more a gesture of diplomacy than power. He was there, not to assert, but to observe. At the center of the chamber, a towering figure loomed. Supreme General Zarnak Kthar, leader of the Zontar Empire, stood before the council with a smug smile. His scales shimmered under the lights, his reptilian eyes gleaming with the cold arrogance of a conqueror. His species, known for their strength and technology, had been at the forefront of the galaxy's militaristic ambitions for centuries. They had crushed entire worlds with ease, and their fleet was unmatched. Earth, Zarnak's voice echoed through the chamber, his tone filled with disdain, a once promising world that now clings to the edges of this galaxy, too proud to know its place. You've been tolerated for long enough. Aidan didn't flinch. His posture remained calm, his eyes scanning the room, noting the subtle reactions of the other representatives. The Galactic Council had called for this meeting, and Earth was expected to make an appearance that would, according to Zarnak, be nothing more than a submission. The Zontar general continued, his words dripping with venom. Your species is an anomaly. How you have survived this long without submitting to a higher power is fascinating, but it ends now. You will relinquish your claim to this corner of the galaxy, or we will take it from you. Across the room, murmurs rippled through the assembly. Some were indifferent, others intrigued. The human delegation, led by Graves, sat quietly at the back. The presence of Earth on the council was a matter of pride for Aidan, but today it was something more, a proving ground for humanity's worth in the eyes of the galaxy's mightiest empire. Your arrogance will be your undoing, Zarnak, a representative from the Vathri clan sneered, his antennae twitching in irritation. You do not know the strength of Earth. Do not underestimate them. Zarnak didn't even spare the Vathri a glance. His focus remained squarely on the humans, a smile curling at the edge of his mouth. Strength. He chuckled. I see no strength. Only fragile flesh and fragile bones, scattered across a speck of rock. Tell me, Graves, he addressed Aidan directly, his eyes narrowing. How does it feel to know that the galaxy has outgrown you? That your existence is nothing more than a relic of an age-long past? Aidan stepped forward, slowly, his boots making no sound on the polished floor. The eyes of the council turned toward him, but he did not speak immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch out for a moment, deliberate. The tension in the air thickened, almost palpable. Every species in the room, every leader, was waiting for him to react. Aidan's voice, when it finally came, was calm, controlled. We're not asking you to understand us, General. Just to respect that we exist. And if you don't, well, we're used to being underestimated. Zarnak's eyes flickered with momentary surprise, but the smile remained. Respect? You demand respect from the very species who have conquered hundreds of worlds? What do you have to offer that is worth respecting, Graves? Your soldiers are weak, your technology primitive. Your species' only strength lies in its ignorance. Aidan's lips quirked into a half-smile. Is that so? I think you'll find that we have a particular talent for surprises. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, then turned his gaze toward the other council members. But for now, Earth asks for only one thing, to be left in peace. The words were simple, but the message was clear. Earth wasn't interested in a war, at least, not yet. They had long since learned the value of patience, of holding their ground without resorting to violence. But the Zontar Empire was too blinded by its own sense of superiority to see that humanity's true power lay not in force, but in the ability to wait, to bide time, to strike when it mattered. Zarnak scoffed, his tail flicking in irritation. Patience? You have no concept of what it takes to survive in this galaxy. The Zontar are not the kind of empire that waits. We take what we want, and we will take Earth. The chamber fell into a heavy silence, and for the first time, the eyes of the council members turned away from Aiden and focused entirely on Zarnak. The Zontar had overstepped. Even the most neutral representatives could sense it. The next words that came from Zarnak's mouth were not a threat, they were a promise. We will destroy your fleet. We will raze your cities. You will be nothing more than another footnote in the history of the Zontar Empire. Aiden remained unmoved, his expression unreadable. The other humans in the delegation exchanged glances, but Aiden gave no sign of worry. There was no panic in his stance, no desperation in his eyes. He stood still, as if he were already considering his next move. Zarnak's words had done nothing but confirm what Aiden had suspected. The Zontar were overconfident. They believed that their size, their weapons, their technology made them invincible. And in their arrogance, they failed to recognize humanity's greatest strength. We'll see about that, Aiden said softly, his tone carrying the weight of finality. Zarnak's eyes flared with irritation. He had expected humanity to cower. Instead, he had found himself faced with a calm, unwavering presence, someone who wasn't afraid of him, and, more importantly, wasn't afraid of waiting. The meeting was over. The council chamber erupted into a flurry of noise and conversation, but Aiden remained at the back, his mind already working. Zarnak's threats were empty. He had no real grasp of who he was dealing with. The Zontar believed that brute force was the answer to everything, that overwhelming power would crush any opposition. But Aiden Graves knew something they didn't. And Earth had no intention of showing its cards just yet. Let them believe we're weak, he whispered to himself. Let them think they have us cornered. We'll show them why we always sit at the back. The game was just beginning. The hum of the ship's engines filled the command deck, a steady thrum that grounded Aiden in the reality of his situation. The sleek, matte-black silhouette of the Saratoga glided through the vacuum of space, far from the spectacle of the Galactic Council. Now, aboard the flagship, Aiden had a single purpose: preparing for the inevitable. Zarnak's threats weren't idle. The Zontar Empire, in its arrogance, would act sooner rather than later. Aiden stood before the large viewport, watching the stars flicker like pinpricks of light against the vast emptiness. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, his mind working at a rapid pace, calculating the next steps. Beside him, Lieutenant Kara Stone, his second-in-command, adjusted the ship's course on the tactical console. Her brow furrowed as she focused on the data streaming across the screen. You think they'll really do it? Kara's voice was low, almost hesitant, as if she was searching for something to hold on to. Aiden didn't immediately respond. Instead, he studied the stars again, each tiny light a reminder of the countless worlds hanging on the edge of a decision. The Zontar were a mighty empire, but they were not invincible. Humanity had faced worse and survived. The trick, Aiden knew, was not to fight their war. Humanity needed to force the Zontar into playing a game they weren't prepared for. They'll act, Aiden finally said, his voice steady. They believe they can crush us underfoot, but they've underestimated one thing. Kara's fingers stilled on the console, sensing the shift in his tone. What's that, sir? Aiden turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. Us, the humans. We don't fight like they do. We don't rush in with brute force and try to overwhelm. We wait. We think. And when the time comes, we strike hard. It's always been our strength. Kara nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. You really think they won't just wipe us out in one blow? The fleet alone could. I know what you're thinking, Aiden interrupted gently. But it's not the fleet we're relying on. Not just the ships, the weapons, the tech. Those things matter, yes. But it's our ability to adapt, to survive, to turn their strength into their weakness. That's what'll win this. Kara didn't reply immediately, her gaze flickering over the star map on the console. The path ahead was uncertain, but Aiden had always believed in humanity's potential to rise against impossible odds. It was a belief shared by every member of the human delegation. But now, as the Saratoga sped toward the outer rim of the galaxy, it felt more like an idea that could very well be tested beyond its limits. Are we really prepared for this? Kara asked, her voice tinged with the weight of the question. Not yet, Aiden admitted, his gaze unwavering. But we will be. We've always found a way. A knock on the doorframe interrupted the conversation. Lieutenant Ryo Ishida, Aiden's comms officer, stepped in, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. Captain, we've received a transmission from the Council. It's encrypted, high priority. Aiden turned, his expression unreadable. Put it through. Ryo nodded and tapped a few keys on his console. Moments later, the projection of a holographic figure flickered to life in front of them. It was Counselor Valora, a representative from the Vathri clan, the same species that had spoken out during the earlier meeting. Captain Graves, Valora's voice crackled through the transmission, I've just returned from the council meeting, and I want to pass on some information. The Zontar are indeed planning an immediate strike against Earth. Their fleet is already mobilizing. Aiden straightened, his mind shifting gears. How immediate? Within days, maybe sooner, Valora replied. They're gathering at the edge of the system. Their first wave will likely be an assault on Earth's outer defenses. A warning shot, if you will. But make no mistake, they're coming for the planet itself. Aiden's jaw tightened. What do we know about their fleet? Their fleet is vast. Dozens of ships, each one capable of devastating entire worlds, Valora said. But there's a weakness, Captain. A structural flaw in their command system. It's not widely known, but the Zontar Empire has always relied heavily on a single node, their flagship, the Tyrannies. If that ship falls, their entire fleet will crumble. Aiden felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Is this information reliable? It is, Valora confirmed, her holographic image nodding gravely. I have contacts within the Zontar military who've confirmed this weakness. Without the Tyrannies as their nerve center, the Zontar fleet will be disorganized. You'll have a window of opportunity. Aiden's thoughts raced. The Tyrannies, the key to the entire Zontar operation. If they could take it out, the entire fleet would falter. A battle won by disabling the nerve center, not by defeating the entire force. It was a strategy he could work with. Thank you, Counselor, Aiden said, his voice firm. We'll need more than just this information to succeed. I'll be in touch with you shortly. Valora's image flickered, and with a final nod, the transmission ended. Did you hear that? Kara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We have a shot at this. A real shot. Aiden nodded, his eyes locked onto the empty space in front of him. We do. But we need to move fast. Get the fleet in position, now. And prep for a strike on the Tyrannies. This won't be easy, but it's our only chance. The Saratoga shifted into hyperdrive, the stars outside stretching into lines of light. The battle was coming, soon and in full force. But Aiden Graves felt a surge of confidence he hadn't felt before. The Zontar had underestimated humanity once, and they were about to learn just how costly that mistake would be. As the ship moved deeper into enemy space, Aiden's thoughts sharpened. They were entering uncharted waters. No one had ever dared to take on the Zontar on their home turf before, but that was the very thing that would make the victory so sweet. Let them come, Aiden muttered to himself. They'll see why humanity always sits at the back, and why they should never forget who's sitting there. The Saratoga plunged deeper into the galaxy's edge, where the Zontar waited, unaware that their greatest challenge was already on the horizon. The vastness of space stretched before them, dark and unfathomable, as the Saratoga hurtled toward the Zontar stronghold. Aiden Graves stood at the helm, eyes focused on the holographic display in front of him. The stars had begun to blur as the ship cut through the fabric of the galaxy, their trajectory clear but treacherous. With every passing second, the weight of the mission grew heavier on his shoulders. The Zontar were formidable, yes, but the knowledge that their flagship, the Tyrannes, was vulnerable gave Aiden a clear purpose. The only question now was whether humanity's greatest weapon would be enough. Kara Stone entered the command deck, her steps purposeful, as always. She wasted no time in approaching Aiden's side. "We're nearly at the edge of Zontar territory, Captain," she reported, eyes flickering to the status board. "We've got a narrow window to strike before the fleet is fully mobilized. Our intel says the Tyrannes is still in position, but we're running out of time." Aiden didn't respond right away. He stared at the blinking icon on the map, where the Zontar fleet loomed like a shadow at the edge of the galaxy. Despite the danger, there was a certain clarity to the mission now. The plan was simple: disable the Tyrannes, disrupt the Zontar chain of command, and force their fleet into disarray. But the simplicity of the strategy didn't make the execution any less dangerous. A successful strike would require precision, timing, and, above all, an understanding of the Zontar's arrogance. "We'll hit them hard and fast," Aiden finally said, turning to face Kara. "I want every ship in position, no distractions." "This is it." Kara nodded, moving to relay orders to the rest of the crew. Aiden turned back to the viewport, watching as the stars blurred into streaks of light. The silent void beyond was both a reminder of the danger they faced and a promise of the vastness they sought to protect. In this emptiness, only human will could turn the tide. "We're entering the outer perimeter of their defense grid," Lieutenant Ishida's voice crackled over the comms. "Preparing to engage." "Understood," Aiden responded. "Steady course, Lieutenant. We've been in worse situations. This is no different." In the silence that followed, Aiden could feel the tension settling over the crew. It was the calm before the storm, the brief moment when everything was poised to change. And yet, in this uncertainty, there was confidence. He knew humanity was capable of doing the impossible. That belief had carried him through countless missions, and it would carry him through this one as well. Kara returned to his side, her face set in determination. "All ships are in position. We're ready to go when you give the word, Captain." Aiden exhaled slowly, scanning the team's faces as they prepared for the inevitable. Their resolve was solid, their confidence unwavering. The Zontar might have the numbers, but humanity had something more powerful, an unpredictable, unyielding spirit. "Begin the assault," Aiden commanded. The Saratoga surged forward, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The enemy ships had yet to detect their approach, their sensors still focused on the space around them. But that wouldn't last for long. Aiden had no illusions about the Zontar's superiority, but he trusted the human fleet's ability to strike with purpose and stealth. Engaging stealth protocols, Ishida's voice came through once more. "They won't know we're here until we're on top of them." Aiden nodded in approval. The Saratoga had been equipped with the best stealth technology humanity could offer, and it was their only hope for gaining the upper hand. The Zontar might have better weapons, but humans had always excelled at turning their enemies' strengths into vulnerabilities. As the ship neared the Tyrannes, Aiden's breath slowed. This was the moment. The Tyrannes was a beast, a massive warship bristling with firepower, but its Achilles' heel lay in the coordination of its fleet. If the flagship was taken down, the Zontar would be crippled. It was a delicate operation, a single shot that could either win the war or ensure humanity's defeat. "Ready for insertion," Kara said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "We've got one shot at this, Aiden." "We won't fail," Aiden replied firmly. "We never do." The Saratoga closed the distance between them and the Tyrannes swiftly, the stealth systems working flawlessly as they approached the heart of the Zontar armada. Aiden could almost sense the Zontar growing more alert, more aware, but by then, it would be too late. "Releasing drone swarm in 3, 2, 1, Ishida announced. A burst of silent, lethal drones shot forward from the Saratoga. They spread out in a wide formation, each one a tiny spear aimed at the Tyrannies' weak point. Aiden's fingers clenched into fists, the tension in the air thickening. He could feel the weight of their collective hopes resting on this moment. The drones breached the outer hull of the Tyrannies' defenses, embedding themselves deep into the ship's structure. The flagship's alarms began blaring, but it was already too late. The explosion came as a flash, a violent burst that lit up the surrounding space in a burst of brilliant white light. Aiden watched, his eyes narrowing as the shock wave rippled outward, disrupting the Zontar fleet. The flagship had been hit. Direct hit, Ishida confirmed, his voice crackling with excitement. The Tyrannies is offline. Their fleet is in disarray. We've got them. But there was no celebration, not yet. Aiden's mind raced as he processed the next step. The Zontar would retaliate, of course. They wouldn't simply collapse from a single blow, no matter how crippling. A second wave of Zontar ships was already closing in, weapons primed for battle. All ships move to defensive positions, Aiden ordered. We need to cover our escape and keep them off balance. Stay sharp. This is just the beginning. Kara's eyes met his, her expression serious but proud. You did it, Aiden. The Zontar will never recover from this. Aiden didn't allow himself to feel relief, not yet. We've only just started. This war's far from over. The battle was far from decided, but in that single strike, humanity had proven something profound. They weren't just players in this galaxy. They were forces to be reckoned with. And the Zontar Empire, for all its might, had just learned that lesson the hard way. The battlefield was a blur of flashing lights and distant explosions, a chaotic dance between the remnants of the Zontar fleet and the human ships that had just struck with deadly precision. Aiden Graves stood at the helm of the Saratoga, his fingers steady as he navigated the ship through a shower of debris and fire. The strike on the Tyrannies had crippled the Zontar's command structure, but the Zontar were far from defeated. The heart of their empire still pulsed with anger, and Aiden knew the war was far from over. Status report, Aiden barked, his voice cutting through the chaos of the bridge. Kara Stone stood at her station, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the tactical screen. We've taken out their flagship, but their secondary fleets are regrouping. They're pissed, Captain, and they're not going down without a fight. Time until they re-establish communication with their remaining ships? Aiden asked, his gaze never leaving the viewport as the Zontar ships circled like predators, preparing for the next wave. Less than 5 minutes, Kara answered, fingers flying over the controls. The Tyrannies may be down, but the Zontar command system isn't gone yet. We've crippled them, but we haven't finished them. Aiden clenched his jaw. A partial victory was still a victory, but the Zontar would regroup quickly. The next few minutes would determine whether humanity could capitalize on their success or if they would be crushed under the Zontar's wrath. We don't have 5 minutes, Aiden muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I want every ship ready for immediate deployment. If they're coming for us, we'll give them a fight they'll never forget. He turned to Lieutenant Ishida, whose face was drawn with concentration. How's the fleet holding up? Ishida glanced at his console. They're holding steady, but we're outnumbered. The Zontar are relentless. They've already launched their counter-offensive. Then we need to make them think twice, Aiden said, his voice growing more determined. We're going to force them into a fight they didn't prepare for. Prep the Saratoga for a full assault on the Zontar's secondary fleet. Aiden's words were like a signal. Kara and Ishida immediately began their work, preparing the ship for the next phase. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, their resolve as solid as their captains. Aiden knew they had little time to act before the Zontar fleet reorganized and began to press the attack. Captain, we've got incoming, Kara said, her voice tight. It's the Zontar flagship's escorts. They're forming up for a counterstrike. The image of the approaching ships flashed on the main screen. Aiden saw the familiar, terrifying bulk of the Zontar warships, large, powerful, and heavily armed. But the Saratoga wasn't about to back down. "Initiate evasive maneuvers," Aiden ordered. "We're not running, we're just making them chase us." The Saratoga jerked violently as it swerved to the right, narrowly dodging a barrage of energy blasts. The Zontar were closing in quickly, their ships firing with precision. But the Saratoga was agile, its design allowing it to outmaneuver the heavier, slower vessels of the Zontar fleet. "We've got one shot at this," Aiden said, turning to his tactical officers. "I want the Saratoga in range of their command ship. We disable it with everything we've got." Kara shot him a look, her lips pressed in a thin line. "We're in range now, Captain. You sure about this? It's a dangerous move." "We don't have a choice," Aiden replied, voice resolute. "If we can take out their command ship, the rest will scatter. Focus everything we've got on that ship." The Zontar warship loomed closer, and Aiden's heart beat faster. The moment of truth was upon them. The first wave of missiles launched from the Saratoga, cutting through space in a deadly arc toward the Zontar flagship. "Missiles away," Ishida confirmed, his voice steady but taut. "Target locked." Aiden watched the holographic display as the missiles reached their target. The first wave of explosions rocked the Zontar flagship, sending ripples of fire and debris into the surrounding void. But the Zontar weren't finished. Their shields flared, absorbing the impact, and their return fire was immediate. The Saratoga rocked under the assault, the force of the blasts causing alarms to blare throughout the ship. "Shields holding," Kara said, her voice strained as she struggled to keep the ship steady. "But we can't take much more of this." Aiden's mind raced. They needed more. The Zontar flagship had absorbed the first wave, but it wasn't invincible. The human fleet was still outnumbered, but they could turn the tide with one decisive strike. "Prepare a second wave," Aiden ordered. "I want those Zontar bastards on the defensive. We'll keep hitting them until they can't fight back." Kara's fingers danced across the controls, sending the next round of missiles toward the flagship. This time, the Saratoga fired its full complement of weapons, everything they had left. A dozen missiles streaked toward the Zontar flagship, hitting its shields with a deafening explosion. "Direct hit," Ishida reported, his voice laced with triumph. "Their shields are down. The flagship's exposed." Aiden didn't hesitate. "Now. All guns, fire everything we've got." The Saratoga's massive energy cannons roared to life, blasting the Zontar flagship with full force. The sound was deafening, the energy beams cutting through the vacuum like a knife through paper. The flagship's hull buckled under the assault, and for the first time, Aiden saw the ship begin to falter. But then, the impossible happened. The Zontar flagship's engines flared to life, and a surge of energy shot out from the ship's core. It wasn't just a last-ditch effort to survive, it was a weapon of desperation. The ship began to destabilize, and Aiden realized too late that the Zontar were willing to destroy their own flagship if it meant taking humanity down with them. "Get out of here!" Kara screamed. "The ship's going to explode." Aiden's heart pounded as he slammed his hand down on the command console. "All ships, break off. Get clear now." The Saratoga swerved violently as it made its escape, the shock wave of the flagship's impending detonation reverberating through space. For a moment, Aiden held his breath, watching as the Zontar flagship buckled and exploded in a brilliant burst of light. The flagship was gone. The fleet was in chaos, and humanity had just turned the tide of the war. But as the Saratoga sped away, Aiden knew this victory was only the beginning. The Zontar might be on the back foot, but the fight was far from over. Humanity had struck a blow, but the galaxy had yet to see the full extent of what they could do. As the stars sped by, Aiden felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The war was far from won, but humanity had proven one thing: they weren't afraid to fight back. And that was the lesson the Zontar would learn, over and over again. The silence that followed the destruction of the Zontar flagship was deafening. Aiden Graves stood at the bridge of the Saratoga, staring out into the vastness of space. The chaos of battle had subsided, but the cost of victory was becoming all too clear. The remnants of the Zontar fleet had scattered, and the human forces were left picking up the pieces. "Captain," Kara Stone's voice cut through his thoughts, her tone more somber than usual. "We've received the fleet's final count. We lost 5 ships in the engagement, and our casualties are significant." Aiden nodded, his jaw tightening. The loss of life weighed on him, but the bigger picture loomed. The Zontar were not broken, merely wounded. They would regroup, and when they did, they would come with a vengeance. "Status on the remaining Zontar ships?" Aiden asked, his voice steady, though the fatigue in his eyes betrayed him. Kara flicked a few switches, bringing up a new set of data. "The secondary fleet has been disabled. Some ships have gone dark, presumed destroyed, but there are still pockets of resistance. They're retreating toward the core systems. They'll be hard to track." "Then we hunt them down," Aiden said, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "We don't let them regroup. We follow them to the core if we have to." Kara shot him a look. "That's a dangerous play, Captain. If we chase them too far, we risk getting caught in their home territory. We don't know what kind of reinforcements they might have waiting for us." Aiden paused, weighing her words. She was right. Pushing deeper into Zontar space could lead to a trap, one they might not survive. But the stakes were high. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Send word to the fleet," he ordered. "We're not retreating. We're pressing forward. Keep them on the back foot." He turned away from Kara and looked out the viewport, watching the scattered wreckage of the battle unfold in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the Zontar were licking their wounds. It wouldn't be long before they retaliated. "Captain," Lieutenant Ishida said, his voice tight with urgency. "We've just intercepted a transmission. It's from the Zontar High Command." Aiden straightened, his interest piqued. "Put it through." The screen in front of him flickered, and the image of a Zontar officer appeared. Aiden had seen this species before. A tall, armored alien, its features angular and sharp. The officer's voice was clipped, the translation matrix struggling to capture the venom in its tone. "This message is for humanity's so-called leaders," the Zontar officer began, its tone cold and condescending. "Your victory at this moment is temporary. The Zontar will rise again, and your species will fall. We do not forget. We do not forgive. This is not the end." The transmission cut off abruptly, the static left behind a lingering chill. Kara's eyes narrowed. "It's a threat. Nothing more." Aiden's fists clenched. He'd known it was coming. The Zontar weren't the kind to concede defeat so easily. But hearing it from their mouth, their arrogance, their certainty, was a bitter pill. He exhaled slowly, his mind calculating. "They're rattled. That much is clear. But we can't let them gather their strength again. We need to push them harder." "I'll notify the fleet," Kara said, moving to her station. But before she could, Aiden stopped her. "Wait. We don't need to be reckless. We need to be smart." She looked at him, her brow furrowing. "Smart how?" Aiden's eyes narrowed, a plan beginning to take shape in his mind. "We'll lure them. We show them that we're not afraid to take the fight to their doorstep. Let them think we're weaker than we are. Then we hit them where they least expect it." "I don't like this," Kara muttered. "You're gambling with our lives, Captain." "I'm not gambling. I'm playing them at their own game," Aiden replied, his voice firm. "We've got the element of surprise. They won't see this coming." Kara sighed but nodded, knowing there was no stopping Aiden once he'd made up his mind. 2 days later, the Saratoga drifted silently through the fringes of Zontar space, its engines barely whispering as they maneuvered into position. Aiden stared at the glowing star in front of them, the warmth of it a stark contrast to the cold, calculating moves they had been making in the past hours. "Ready?" Aiden asked, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. "Ready," Kara replied. The rest of the bridge crew was quiet, aware of the plan's danger but focused on their task. They had all seen what Aiden was capable of when it came to strategy, and for all his risks, he had a way of making the impossible work. The Zontar fleet would think they were retreating. The human ships, battered and bleeding, would head toward a small, uncharted system, hoping to disappear into the darkness. The Zontar would follow, eager for an easy victory. But when they did, they would find themselves in a trap. "Deploy the decoys," Aiden ordered. The decoy ships were a new technology, drones that mimicked human vessels, designed to confuse and disorient. A few hundred of them launched from the Saratoga, scattering into the void. They were outfitted with weak shields and limited weaponry, enough to make the Zontar think they had a larger fleet than they actually did. Aiden watched as the Zontar ships took the bait. They followed the decoys, the same arrogance and confidence Aiden had come to expect. They thought victory was within their grasp. "What now?" Ishida asked, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Now we spring the trap," Aiden said, his voice cool and calculating. "Engage their rear guard. We'll catch them off balance." The Zontar fleet, too eager for the kill, had moved into the perfect position. Aiden's plan had worked. Their arrogance had been their downfall. "Fire!" Aiden commanded. The human fleet's guns opened up in synchronized precision, the Zontar fleet's rear guard falling apart under the assault. The surprise was overwhelming. Zontar ships, once so confident, were now scrambling. Their command center, unaware of the ambush, tried to regain control, but it was too late. Within moments, the Zontar fleet was scattered, their forces in disarray. Aiden allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before turning back to the tactical screen. The war wasn't over, not yet. But today, humanity had struck a blow that would echo across the galaxy. "We've done it," Kara said quietly, a note of awe in her voice. "We've made them see what they're up against," Aiden replied. "And they'll remember it. For a long time." The Zontar had underestimated humanity. They had made the mistake of thinking they were the apex predators. Now they knew the truth. The fight wasn't over. But the Saratoga had proven one thing. Humanity could win, even against the galaxy's strongest species.